Hi, Brink.
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm good. Yourself?
Can't complain. Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright. This is The Wright Show, available on both streaming video and via audio podcast. You are Brink Lindsey, currently, Vice President for Policy at the Niskanen Center?
That is correct.
Also, co-author of The Captured Economy with, I guess, Steve Tellis. Is that
Steve
true?
Tellis. Who's a political scientist at Johns Hopkins, but also a senior fellow at the Niskanen Center.
Okay. So we're going to eventually in this conversation talk about what Niskanen is, what it's up to, kind of policy-wise. You guys made a big splash with a Niskanen Center report, I don't know, a year ago or something. David Brooks did a column about it, and it got a lot of attention. We're going to talk about that eventually. Niskanen is very, I would say, policy-oriented think tank. You might think that's redundant, that, all think tanks are policy-oriented. But I think Niskanen, maybe more than some, is intent on getting the policy right in accordance with certain ideological principles, and then figuring out what politics would facilitate the realization of those policies.
It's noteworthy how distinctive Niskanen is in its focus on actually trying to get policy change across the finish line, as opposed to simply engaging in the war of ideas and doing conferences and writing op-eds and white papers. The early model of the Heritage Foundation back in the Reagan era, where it was really focused on working with Congress and working with the White House, is a model that most think tanks really haven't followed. Certainly my longtime employer, the Cato Institute, really just had a very small-scale government affairs outfit. But at Niskanen, we
should say maybe that for a long time, Cato's ideology, libertarianism, was considered so far out of the mainstream that political manifestation was unlikely, I might say. Right? When I went to Washington to work at the New Republic in the late 80s, that was kind of the deal. But since then, libertarianism has moved closer to the mainstream, meanwhile, or it's become more part of the conversation. Meanwhile, you, who were at Cato, have moved away from libertarianism.
Yes.
I don't want to get, let's tell you what, let's put this conversation on hold a little, because I do want to start with politics, which I think is justified both because, of course, as we've suggested, for any set of policy ideas to be realized, the politics have to be amenable to that. You have to arrange for them to be amenable to that if they're not. But secondly, I would think that in a way, sometimes part of the definition of a successful policy is that it solves political problems. So like right now, we have a certain amount of discontent in America, one of whose manifestations seems to be Donald Trump. And I assume that the set of policies Niskanen advocates would, in your view, alleviate the discontent or address some of the root causes of the discontent.
Address them, yes.
So I think it's fair to start with politics, and let's start. Let's just get super crass and start about talk about electoral politics briefly.
Okay.
And I promise you, this will lead to into all the discussions we've just foreshadowed. So as we tape this on a Friday, that'll probably run like early next week. Last night, Joe Biden got into trouble for saying something like poor kids are just as smart as white kids, when he meant to say rich kids. And this is, there have been a couple of kinds of reactions. This one is, oh, yeah, that's the famously gaffe-prone Joe Biden. Another line has been he is suffering some degree of cognitive decline that's not trivial, and that Democrats should be aware of before they choose their candidate. And this kind of leads to something that our listeners and viewers may be sick of hearing me say, but by my lights, the Democrats do not have a very strong array of candidates in a sheerly political sense. That's not to say there are none that I identify with ideologically. It's just to say that if you are going to design, go to central casting and say, I want the candidate who can beat Donald Trump, I just don't see that. I just don't see I see candidates who could. I just don't see a candidate who's anything like the politically ideal candidate. And Joe Biden would have been more like that, I think, 12 years ago when he was more mentally agile, but he's not. And I'm just wondering, first of all, do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I do, and not happily, because I'm looking ahead to 2020. I'm a one-issue voter, and that is when it comes to the Democratic presidential race. The one issue is who can beat Donald Trump, who can beat him by the largest, most decisive possible margin, who can, through that victory, completely discredit this monstrosity of an administration we're currently living through. So nobody of the 400,000 hopefuls really clearly fits that bill in my mind. Biden.
What do they lack? I mean, what is the ideal candidate?
So it's a combination of persona that is attractive and projects this combination of sort of personability and approachability and strength and decisiveness. I think Kamala Harris may be the most attractive persona out of the candidates. It's also someone who is just at a time when political loyalties tend to run along demographic lines. It's people who tick the right demographic boxes to mobilize constituencies to get them to the polls. So I think for a Democratic candidate, having a person of color, having a woman on the ticket is probably a big plus. On top of that,
just quickly, do you think she can? If you are of the view that one of the goals of the Democratic Party should be to win over some of these swing voters in swing states like Pennsylvania, whatever, Wisconsin, whatever they are these days, and kind of get what you might say called gettable Trump voters and independents and so on. Do you think she's well suited to the task? And I'm not really asking, are those people ready to vote for a black candidate? I think some of them did vote for Barack Obama, but she's not Barack Obama. And in fact, she had with Joe Biden in the first debate a kind of a racialized exchange that was of the kind that I don't think Obama would have engaged in.
Agreed. So I just, for Harris, I'm speaking narrowly just about her personal attributes. And so I think it's tough for women to be strong without then getting tagged with all kinds of sexist stereotypes that they're shrinkable or whatever. I think her background as a prosecutor gives her that just sort of toughness, that she can be tough but also likable at the same time, and that's hard to pull off as a woman, and I think she does that, and that's a big plus for her. As for playing in the Midwest, I don't think the ball game is switching Trump voters back to the Democratic column. I think the ball game is getting your folks to the polls. It's not really about these weird Obama Trump voters. But I think on the policy front, although I don't think that's the most important determinant of candidate strength, I think it is important, and it's not important about the policy details, but what matters is through the way you talk about policy issues, through the issues you focus on and the positions you take, you convey, on the one hand, a clear sense that there's big problems in the country, that there's reasons for real discontent, and that you are not in any way complacent about the problems in the country that are making people desperate enough to vote for people like Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So on the one hand, you can't be complacent about the state of America. You have to recognize, and this is where the kind of centrists of the Howard Schultz, being the apotheosis of this, just convey that everything's okay, and we're just going to nibble around the edges, and for the heaven's sake, don't raise taxes on billionaires or people of means. That kind of centrist, moderate form of complacency, I think, is just absolutely dead in the water this year, and you can't do it. At the same time, to convey in your policy platform a lack of complacency about government as usual. So there's American voters tend to not like huge moves in one direction. They're very thermostatic in their votes. If the country's policies shift far to the left, then public opinion shifts quickly to the right. You saw that in 2009, 2010. If the country lurches to the right with Trump, you see this huge surge in support for immigration. So there is some kind of ballast in American public opinion that doesn't like humongous movements. So you want to convey, I think, that you can make bold changes without completely without talking about revolution and burning everything down. But
at the same time, this is an era. I mean, whatever the historical precedents are, this moment right now is a populist moment, right? And part of populism is to be open to radical ideas, and in a sense, right? To open to, demonization, open to correspondingly strong remedies. In dealing with the demons, and not that some of the demons aren't demons. I don't mean to say that, but in any event, on both the left and the right, you're seeing a lot of finger pointing. These are the bad guys. They're the ones taking advantage of you, and we're going to fix that. And this is the kind of moment we're in, right? So,
agreed. It's just if you evince a completely uncritical faith in investing huge new powers in technocratic government, then I think you are running afoul of the discontents in America that think that the best and the brightest who run all of our governing institutions aren't doing a good job, and therefore you have to have a policy message that doesn't just say if we give a lot of power to the government and they're going to solve all the problems. I think you have to not only convey that there are vested interests that have rigged the economy in a way that's bad for most of us and good perhaps for the
which you actually believe is the case, as I understand it, right?
Which I do believe. But you have to, when you talk about government remedies, you have to recognize that government itself is intensely vulnerable to that kind of capture. And if you just talk about huge carte blanche new government programs, then it looks like you're just creating new opportunities for rent seekers and regulatory capture.
Rent seekers being special interests that exploit the regulatory system to their own benefit and warp it kind of in their direction.
Correct. So this is, I think, not in any way an easy needle to thread, but some combination of an embrace of bold reform, because we can't be complacent about the problems that are confronting America. I mean, for the love of God, we're the richest country in the world and our life expectancy has fallen for 3 straight years. Something is badly wrong here. But by the same token, I don't think the way in which the kind of democratic socialist inflected lurch to the left of the Democratic Party, I don't think that's likely to be the best possible strategy. I think that will leave that will turn off a bunch of voters who don't like Trump, but who are scared of sort of what they perceive as revolutionary change and would either be motivated to stick with the devil they know or be motivated to just sit it out. So,
yeah, I got to say, my own view is that, leaving aside the merits of single payer healthcare, Medicare for all, whatever, I do think saying you will not have the option of keeping your current health insurance provider is a dangerous political message, just on political grounds alone.
Yep.
So we probably agree on that. But
that would be an example of the overreach I'm thinking of.
Yeah. So
Biden, to me, on one hand, he just conveys return to normalcy, a third term for Obama. I think a lot of people are just exhausted with the insanity of what's going on right now, and the kind of comforting message. If he were 10 years younger, of course, he was gaffe prone and a bad candidate back, 30 years ago. So I'm worried about just his capacity as a candidate. And there are people who with a policy message I like Michael Bennett. But he's just not catching on. His He's,
he comes off as a super nice guy, but not a charismatic or strong guy to me.
Yeah. And I think you need a kind of outsized persona, to match the moment and to go toe to toe with Trump.
So I guess two questions for you then, and this will get us into the policy. First, if you had to choose one of the candidates who has the best chance of beating Trump, just period, leaving aside what you think about their policies, who would that be? And then secondly, who is the candidate whose policies most mirror your own preferences, kind of the Niskanen preferences maybe? And maybe you've already given us the second answer in Michael Bennet, but for starters, what's the answer to the first question?
Okay, so it's with the caveat that it's crazy early right now, and new information could change the way I think. Again, my criterion is who can beat Trump. Looks to me, based on all the polling data right now, Biden's the strongest candidate against Trump, so I'm for Biden. That could change.
Yeah, I think Biden is going to change it for us if you give him enough time. I mean, these slips are coming at a faster rate than they used to. I noticed this months ago and tweeted about it. And look, it's not like it's something to be ashamed of. The guy's in his late 70s. This is actually normal. I would say Bernie Sanders is unusual in how sharp he remains at that age.
Agrees completely. I agree. And I just, as of right now, early August, Biden looks strongest.
Okay. Do you have a second? Do you have a second choice?
He will look that way in a few months' time.
Just quickly, one more question. What do you think of Bernie? Because the one thing I worry about is with Bernie, aside from the fact that if he gets a nomination, huge sums of money will be devoted to defeating him, and the label socialist will be, kind of tattooed to his forehead. Aside from that, what bothers me is that thing about health insurance. I think that's a tough thing politically. But I got to say, in some ways, he seems like, I think the polls show that right now he looks like a strong candidate versus Trump. And I listened to part of that Joe Rogan podcast, and I was really impressed with just the way he comes across as earnest, genuinely committed to solving the kinds of problems that helped get Trump elected and so on.
Yeah, so he's got a weird kind of anti-charisma that is good for this. I'd say he's kind of like the left-wing Ron Paul. It would just show there's just a lot more that a lot of his appeal isn't really that you buy his specific message, but that you like this cranky old guy who's telling it like it is, and some kind of Old Testament fire and brimstone.
Well, we that worked in 2016, right? Same formula. Not that they're alike, but that generic part of it.
For him, I just worry about, honeymooning in the Soviet Union and going on and on about the wonderful cultural palaces there when he visited. That's just an albatross around his neck that you just absolutely do not need in an election that I think is as important as any we've ever had in American history.
That was a long time ago, though, right? I mean, who doesn't have skeletons in their closet that old? But anyway, so let's switch to policy.
Not too many people who run for president have that skeleton in their closet.
No, but I mean, look, compared to Trump's skeletons, or compared to, some of these Democratic candidates have skeletons that haven't yet gotten out of the closet.
Let me just say one word about Elizabeth Warren, because she's someone who comes close to what I was looking for, but I don't think she quite fits the bill. So in terms of having a coherent idea for why she wants to run for president and what she wants to do, there's nobody who she's just head and shoulders above everybody. She's got a clear theory of the case, and it's a theory that resonates completely with me, that capitalism's great when the rules are structured so that the pursuit of private profit is consistent with the public interest, but when the rules are skewed so that you can profit by screwing everybody else, then capitalism becomes just, a field day for sociopaths. And we're there right now. There's a whole bunch of different sectors where the rules are written in a way to benefit insiders at the expense of everybody else. And so to make capitalism work for everybody, we need to rewrite a lot of the rules. So that is the message that we told in Captured Economy. So in terms of the music, she's singing my song. Her lyrics, though, are I think different. And sufficiently different and sufficiently though she says she's a capitalist down to her bones, there is a kind of just sort of knee-jerk anti-market reflex I see in trying to, and wanting to eliminate all private health insurance and wanting labor representation on corporate boards and breaking up big tech and her embrace of new style protectionism that I don't think is really true to her idea that capitalism works great if we just get the regulatory capture out of the way. I think she wants to really inhibit markets with some heavy-handed top-down government control for people's own good. And that's not the message that I gravitate.
Okay. Is there a candidate that on policy grounds you like more than you like Michael Bennet?
No, he would be tops.
And what is it about what he's saying that resonates with your view policy-wise?
Yeah, so I think he's, I think he understands the big picture, the need for bold changes. He also understands that making crazy sort of pie in the sky promises that can't possibly be realized in the current political environment is just a setup for frustration and more desperation and activity.
Well, what are the bold changes he favors? I'm trying to see where the line is between bold change and pie in the sky.
Yeah, so he doesn't go. So I think, on healthcare, he wants to improve access. He wants to move in the direction of figuring out how to eliminate some of the nasty provisions that insiders use to make our healthcare prices higher than everywhere else. But he doesn't go to the point of of eliminating private insurance.
Well, so is he like, I don't know anything about his views on this. Is he kind of like if Obama had not faced Republicans in Congress and could have passed full-fledged Obamacare complete with the public option, is that kind of where Bennett is?
Yeah. I'm going to confess, I'm not like, I can't recite chapter and verse all of his policy.
Well, is that where you are?
So I would like to take a sort of 10-year timeout from healthcare financing debate. I would like to patch up Obamacare and make it work as well as possible and focus our attention on healthcare, not on who pays for it, but how expensive it is. I think a lot of the efforts to reform in either direction get hung up on sticker shock because everything is so god-awfully expensive. So if you want to move in the direction of single payer, everybody freaks out when you look at the price tag. If you want to move in the direction of having more, patients having more skin in the game and having more cost discipline through patient choice, those things break apart politically because of sticker shock, because everything costs too much. I think it's very difficult to rationalize our healthcare financing as long as our healthcare prices are so crazy high. Mm-hmm. So I would like to focus on that, not on big, bold new financing schemes. So I think just even in their choice of what to prioritize in healthcare, the Dems, and once again, looking at healthcare financing, have picked the wrong battle.
Is the diagnosis of Bernie Sanders about the source of the inflated costs in healthcare, do you think he's right about a lot of that? And I might ask the same thing about Elizabeth Warren, although I'm more confident you'll say yes with Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, so the bottom line is the big difference between the United States and Europe is that in the United States, the medical profession captured the state before we moved in the direction of large-scale public spending for healthcare. Whereas in Europe, they made that move towards socialization first, and then the government was the biggest player in the game and exerted price discipline on the medical profession and on hospitals, et cetera. Here, by the time we got around to Medicare in the mid-'60s, the AMA already completely had a dominant position in healthcare political economy. They had already created a very nice cartel. They already controlled supply through accreditation of medical schools and control of the number of medical school slots and control of the number of residencies. And so they, unsurprisingly, shaped our public spending initiatives in a way that maximize their income on a fee for service model as much as possible. And then sort of that's the original sin, that we have a healthcare system that is extravagantly generous to healthcare providers, to doctors and hospitals at levels that are multiples of the kind of remuneration they get anywhere else. And
so how does that, if we can just pause on that, how does that play out? Like when I go to the doctor, I mean, one thing I've noticed about the general routine with doctors is they say you need this test and this test and this test, and people say okay. Yeah. And people don't even ask how much it's going to cost. I mean, some people may, but partly because a lot of people are on health insurance, but also partly it's just not a tradition to interrogate your doctor about these kind. I mean, is that an example of something that would be different in a different country, or what?
Yeah, so you can imagine ways of paying doctors that aren't okay just on a fee for service basis. On that basis, the more services you provide, the higher your fees are.
Right.
You're paid X dollars per patient per year in a kind of HMO sort of setting, where you've got incentives to not overtreat, and incentives to do preventive care that keep costs down over time. Then the healthcare providers just face a completely different incentive universe than they do under our system, which is the more you build them, the more you make. The more stuff you do, and the more expensive stuff you do, the more you make. That then even bleeds out in the United States into the distribution of the types of doctors. In Europe, it's about 2/3 general practitioners and about 1/3 specialists. Here, it's about 2/3 specialists and about 1/3 general practitioners. Specialists make a lot more money than general practitioners. So we're much more dependent on highly specialized, highly expensive healthcare providers than the rest of the world, and we pay through the nose for it. We give drug makers monopolies in the form of patents. And then we allow them to extend those monopolies through all kinds of this evergreening and all kinds of games they play to extend patent lives beyond their normal 20 years by making cosmetic, trivial changes in the product, so that they can get a longer monopoly. And then we refuse to impose any kind of price discipline on them at all. So in other settings where we have monopolies, public utilities, you have rate setting, because if you have a monopolist, you just letting them charge whatever the traffic will bear will be abusive. But we drug makers charge whatever the traffic will bear, and that's wrongheaded. So in hospitals, I think there's a kind of indiscriminate, lazy, complaints these days about industrial concentration and the need for a sort of a big new wave of antitrust. I'm not sure that charge plays out in a lot of the industries where it's leveled, particularly high tech. But it sure plays in hospitals, and there has been enormous concentration in hospitals and monopolization of markets, combined with certificate of need legislation, which is state laws where you have to get hospital's permission before you build a new hospital in the area, So you mean
there are chains of hospitals that exert
have lots of market power? Yes. So
how does that play out? It's like, does it just play out like there's only one big good hospital anywhere near me, and that hospital keeps other ones from existing?
Yep. And bought up the other ones too. And
they always have these names that inspire trust. It's like, and they affiliate.
No Crazy Eddie's hospital, right?
They affiliate with institutions that confer trust. It's like there's one near me that has managed to adopt the brands of 2 Ivy League schools, one of which doesn't even have a medical school. So it's like the Princeton Medical Center with Penn Health or something. I mean, both. It doesn't use the logo of the Princeton University. I'm not even sure the university is granting it the permission, but anyway, it makes it sound like amazing. It's like.
So I think the Democrats and just in general, healthcare policy activists have picked the wrong bad guy. Their main villain is the insurance companies, and now to up the stakes on showing how villainous they are and how seriously we're going to take their villainy, Democrats are proposing extinction for the bad guys, right? We're just going to eliminate them. But I think the real bad guys are doctors and hospitals, and they're a lot harder to pick a fight with. Doctors are popular, and hospitals and doctors and hospitals together are bigger, have more political muscle than insurance companies. But I think so my prescription is to outflank the Democratic Party on the libertarian left. That is, they're not being bold enough. They're not going after the real insiders who are most distorting the system. They're picking on a relative weakling, the insurance companies, when they should be picking on the real source of the problem, which is the healthcare providers.
Right. Of course, they would say that their approach is going to probably reduce the remuneration that goes to various players in the system, including doctors.
And the idea is they can use the market power of a single payer to negotiate lower prices, and they could if they're willing to do it. They could do it right now, and they don't. So
okay, now you use the term libertarian left. I think some people are going to possibly have to pause and chew on that before they figure out what it means. What does that mean?
Just that to be bolder than I think that the more radical diagnosis of the healthcare problem isn't how it's being paid for. It's who is shaping how much we pay, and so that is going to the left of the Democrats by looking for a more sort of deep-seated radical cause of the problem, and indeed a harder problem to deal with, the political might of healthcare providers. But it's libertarian in the sense that it's addressing folks who are sucking up subsidies from the government and benefiting themselves at the expense of all the rest of us.
Mm-hmm. Have you given any thought to running for president, Brent?
No.
I think you've got a little niche that's open for you alone. Now, Will Wilkinson he embraces the stage a little more than you, I think, possibly.
Yeah.
He's one of your fellow Niskanen people. And I would totally be willing to give the nominating speech at some political party that convention for a party that doesn't yet exist and nominate Will. So let him know that.
Okay.
But by the way, Will, I mean, I don't want to get into personalities. Will is seriously woke these days. You follow Will on Twitter. I mean, I think you should have a word with Will. If you're styling yourself, Niskanen did this. The report that got a lot of attention was called "The Center Can Hold," right? And Will was an co-author of that. But I'll tell you, on Twitter, he's not coming off as a centrist. If I were you, I would sit him down and have a talk.
Compared to Will, I'm downright groggy. But that's the thing about Niskanen, that we have shed the bonds of ideological strictures, and each of us following the evidence where we think it leads. That means we don't always agree about everything. There's a kind of a loose syndrome of shared thinking that binds us together and makes us look, I think, distinctive and like something coherent. But we argue a lot amongst each other.
Okay. So in the David Brooks column about that report you issued, I think he emphasized that a theme in your ideology, kind of roughly speaking, the Niskanen ideology, or at least the ideology reflected in that particular report, was redistribution, yes, regulation, no. That's oversimplified because obviously some of your own remedies to these concentrations of power involve regulation of a sort, or at least a recalibration of regulation, not the traditional kind of abandonment of regulation that you might associate with pure libertarians.
Right.
But I gather there's some truth in that are you fine with a really extensively progressive income tax structure that does do a lot of redistributing, as long as it doesn't involve like single payer healthcare?
So what we want to do is, right now in the sort of classic left-right divide, we've conflated regulatory issues and spending issues. So we have big government versus small government. And so big government is a lot of regulating, a lot of spending. Small government's not so much regulating and not so much spending. We want to separate those two ideas. And then it divides into, you've got one side, the progressives are pro-government, and you've got the conservatives and libertarians who are pro-market. And that's wrong because, so we're pro-government and pro-market because you need both. That at the heart of a thriving, dynamic, prosperous society is a competitive market order. That competitive market order is not the absence of all laws. It is a regulatory achievement. It is a set of laws that creates the invisible hand by aligning private businesses' incentives with the broader public interest, that you profit by making good stuff for people rather than by stealing stuff from them or imposing costs on them. So it's not like we're against regulation, but we are in favor of regulations setting up a free market competitive system. And we are bullish about free market competition and entrepreneurship and that kind of bottom-up, unplanned dynamism. Mm-hmm. And we think that kind of market order has to be encased in, embedded in a political economy that provides the necessary public goods, including social insurance. That in a dynamic, hurly-burly, creative destruction of modern, capitalist economics, you are going to have a demand for protection from falling through the cracks, from the hazards of life. That demand is irrepressible. We've had, Ayn Rand's been on the bestseller lists for 60 years, and it has not changed the fact that demand for protection from big risks in life is as strong now as it was before. So libertarianism hasn't budged that one bit. All libertarianism has accomplished is made it very difficult to respond to that demand directly by taxing people and by paying for government programs that give resources to people above board, on budget, tax Peter to pay Paul. But because the demand doesn't go away, the problem doesn't go away. You just squeeze the balloon and it will pooch out elsewhere. And it will pooch out in the form of tax preferences and loopholes. It will pooch out in the form of regulatory fixes that help particular companies instead of helping competition. And so it will pooch out in much less libertarian, market-friendly, and well-functioning ways than if you just address a need directly by giving people more money through social insurance. Mm-hmm. So we are in favor of a free market welfare state. That is a welfare state that robustly insures people against bad luck, and we see that as a necessary complement to a free market system. So it provides that without that protection, you just will not have sustainable political support for free market creative destruction. Meanwhile, without the free market creative destruction, you won't have the money to pay for the robust welfare state. So we see those two things not as antagonists as they are set up in the current longstanding left-right debate, but as necessary complements.
Okay, this actually kind of leads to universal basic income, I think, which is, I think, pretty much the entire platform of one Democratic candidate. Now, I gather there are two varieties of UBI. I mean, one is that, what they have in common is we're going to give every American a minimum amount of money, which first of all seems kind of weird to me because a lot of Americans don't really need it and some really do, but leave that aside. Yeah. The idea is that the government at least provides some, floor on how much cash people get from the government or something. But anyway, there are two varieties. One is that this is going to replace all the specific welfare programs like Medicaid, and I see that as the libertarian variety. It's kind of anti-paternalism. Yeah. And then the other one would say, no, poor people can keep getting Medicaid and we'll still have Social Security and so on. This is just additional money we're giving to people. Does any of this, does universal basic income fit into your view or the Niskanen view in any way?
Yeah, I'm not pro UBI, but I'm sort of pro UBIzation. That is, I think that is a correct direction. So first, the kind of Andrew Yang pitch for a UBI is that the robots are going to come and take all our jobs, and we're not going to have anything to do, and therefore we need a UBI because otherwise the apocalypse. I think that's goofy, and I don't buy that. I don't think that's the problems we're facing right now. So that pitch I just think is off. So because that pitch is off, I think to a certain extent, just as you mentioned, this is a solution in search of a problem. A lot of people don't need the UBI. We have focused need, and we should have focused response to need. Mm-hmm. That said, I do think government policies should economize on government competence. Government competence is limited and can be stretched over thin. And one thing that governments can do very well is write checks and send them to large numbers of people and get their address correct. So to the extent you can respond to social problems or address social needs by writing checks to people and then letting them figure out how to spend the money, I favor that approach. So in particular, I'm kind of for a child UBI. I'm for a much more generous child tax credit that's reimbursable, which would function as to really substantially reduce child poverty and would do so in a way that's not unlike a UBI. Just gives kids money. But for grown-ups, I would rather have our aid to low-income workers more tied to work, because I think grown-ups don't just want a check. They want a job. They want to be meaningful, productive participants in society. And so I would rather see some kind of wage subsidies that boost opportunity but tie it to work rather than just cutting checks to the able-bodied.
Okay. So let's get to the to kind of the root cause level of the current discontent. Is there kind of a theory of the case implied in your set of policy prescriptions? I mean, for example, there are two views that are often taken as contrasting. I'm not sure that they're as incompatible as people claim, but in terms of explaining the support for Trump, there is on the one hand like an ethnic identity explanation, which is sometimes cast as racism, sometimes in less pejorative terms, but in any event, the idea is that this is organized around an identification with your ethnicity that leads you to bridle against an influx of foreigners or perception that your culture is changing rapidly or whatever. There's that theory of the case. Then there's an economic theory of the case. These people have seen jobs disappear and they're having trouble getting jobs, and so we need economic policies that address that problem. Again, I personally don't see these as entirely alternative explanations. I mean, I
don't at all see them as alternative. I think.
Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm right in thinking that a lot of people do see them as almost starkly alternative?
They certainly try to, because we've been having this argument since Trump got elected, whether it's economic anxiety or
right.
And I think it's absolutely both. That is.
And they interact, right? I mean, if you have economic grievances, you're more likely to find foreigners to blame them on, right?
So yes. We're in a period of rapid cultural change, not only demographic change through immigration, but cultural change like the same-sex marriage revolution that occurred, where just in a decade, it went from a big winning issue for conservatives to they were just been flattened. And the speed with which they lost, I think, freaked them out more generally about the speed of by their lights, adverse cultural change. So that's going on, and there is a backlash against that. But I think that the form that backlash takes of kind of a populist search for scapegoats, in particular scapegoats of a different color, is very much more tempting option when times aren't good, when people's sort of economic prospects are bleak, or maybe not their personal prospects are bleak, but the town they live in is shrinking, or they're seeing a lot of dysfunction around them. That kind of anxiety leads people to get into a defensive crouch, makes them more susceptible to whatever sort of latent tendencies they had towards racial resentment in the first place. Just when you feel like things aren't going well and the future is going to be grimmer than the present, you're vulnerable to demagogues who can scapegoat, and so the best scapegoats there are foreigners, and we just happen to have had a huge wave of immigration over the past generation, and so those things all fit together. But my theory of the case sort of doesn't depend on getting one of those things right, or which side is right, or whether it's my, all of the above that's right. I would say whatever the cause, we are in a period right now it's a crisis of legitimacy for liberal democratic capitalism. The evidence for that is the Republicans.
I'm sorry, you said for liberal democratic
capitalism.
Capitalism, okay.
What the basic model that emerged out of the ideological competition of systems of the 20th century between capitalism and communism. The winning model was liberal democratic welfare state regulated capitalism. And that basic model, I think, is the correct model. It needs to be, it's had a buildup of problems and defects and dysfunctions that need to be tended to. It's also times change and institutions need to be updated in keeping with new circumstances. But that's the correct model. But people have lost faith in that model because it's not delivering the goods. And when people lose faith in governing elites and established institutions, they look for they are vulnerable to snake oil salesmen and demagogues, and that's what we have. So the only way to, and I think, so Bernie Sanders' appeal, the idea that someone who wasn't even a member of the Democratic Party and who avowedly called himself a socialist would almost beat, sort of American political royalty last go around, was of a piece with Trump's appeal, and both evinced a sort of crashing lack of faith in established institutions and a hunger for something different. So that means the governing elites have to re-legitimize themselves through effective governance. The only way to beat back populism, whether it comes from racism or economic anxiety, the only way to beat it back is with policies that actually make people's lives better and expand opportunity in tangible, recognizable ways. And so that is the challenge. And if that can't be done, then desperation and craziness will just spin even farther out of control, and will. I don't like how that story ends. So figuring out what policies can put our basic model aright, clean out its abuses, and update it for the times. That is the challenge, and it's not just a challenge for, we need to do this so that we can optimize policy. If we don't do this, our whole model is at existential risk.
Okay. Now, is there anything we've left out in talking about kind of the main policy areas that need to be focused on if we're going to solve this political problem?
Yeah, I think we addressed. Of course, there's tons of detail to go into. We didn't talk.
I'll tell you one quick
climate change,
question.
And that's an important thing that we do at Niskanen. But
one quick question is just education, and certainly including and maybe in particular higher education. Bernie Sanders has this free college for all idea. Do you have a view? I mean, I think when it comes to public education, you are pro charter schools for one thing. If there's anything else you want to say about that, go ahead and say it. But also, what about the question of higher education, conventional college versus vocational college, vocational school, and what role, if any, the government should play in subsidizing that?
Yeah, I guess here again, this is a question where I think that the progressives have kind of picked the wrong target. So to me, higher education isn't the main issue right now. It's non-college. It's the people who don't go to college. So you remember Glenn Ross when Alec Baldwin comes in and says we're going to have this sales contest, and there's
first prize is
second prize is a set of steak knives, third prize is you're fired, right?
Right.
Well, I think the current American human capital development system has two prizes. Prize one, you finish a 4-year university and you enter the meritocracy as a knowledge worker. Second prize is you're a loser. That's how we do it. We have successful 4-year college grads and then people who failed to grab that brass ring. And so we try to shunt more and more people into the college mode, but they're just not all going to go there without paying any attention to what the other 2/3 of Americans, how they are being trained to imbue them with the kinds of skills that can give them a good livelihood in the 21st century. And all we have are sort of future college students and people who are future college dropouts or failures. And that's a terrible system. So what I think the biggest priority in education these days is coming up with a different track, a track for success for people who aren't aimed at college. And at the K through 12 level, I think that means a big shift towards, especially at the high school age, towards apprenticeships and some sort of blurring of the boundaries between classroom and the workplace.
Okay. I mean, I think the Bernie Sanders idea is that, granted, the people who don't go to college are losing out, and so the goal is to send everybody to college. But I gather you think that prescription either isn't a good match with the job structure of the economy, and or a good match for different human backgrounds and capacities or something.
Right now, it's about 1/3 of people are graduating college, and a goodly number of them are in kind of low-rung jobs that don't require a college degree. So I don't see how diluting that credential even dramatically further is going to help anybody.
Okay. Anything else you want to say before we call it a day?
I think we've covered a lot of ground.
We have covered a lot of ground. So, as I said, your book is The Captured Economy with Steve Tellis, and we'll link to that. We'll link to the report. The center can hold.
It's coming out soon.
What's that?
The paperback is coming out in September, I believe.
Our timing is perfect.
Yeah.
Although you don't want to give people an incentive to wait and not buy the hardcover.
No. Well, they can order. Yeah.
Yeah. So forget that you said that.
Exactly.
And then your Twitter handle is what?
It's at Lindsey_Brink. I don't know why Brink Lindsey was taken. Who took that?
Who knew there would be two of you?
Yeah.
That's SEY_ Brink, and I'm at Robert Ryder. Anything else about where people can find your stuff?
Go to the Niskanen Center website. That's easy to find, and all our stuff is there.
Then we will link to that.
We also have a website, capturedeconomy.com, which focuses specifically on regulatory capture.
We will link to all of this on the bloggingheads.tv website. Some people watch this stuff on YouTube, where not all of those links will be, but they'll be on the Blogging Heads TV website. And thanks a lot, Brink. Let's do this again before too long.
Okay. Thanks, Bob. Great talking to you.
Same here.